So you want to own a self-storage facility. No employees to manage, no inventory to spoil, no customers to charm, just steel boxes, a fence and a keypad. On paper, it looks like the closest thing to free money real estate has ever produced. Here is the paradox. The business with the lowest operating complexity in commercial real estate also has one of the highest failure rates among first-time owners. Empty boxes generate zero revenue and cost almost nothing to sit empty, which sounds harmless. It isn't. The single fact is exactly what quietly bankrupts the operators who thinks this is a hand cash machine. Stick around, because the gap between this business looks like from the outside and what it actually does to your balance sheet is where most of the money either gets made or gets buried. Tier 1 is the bootstrapped play. A converted barn, a fenced lot, or a single small building in a rural or ex-urban town. $20,000 to $60,000 gets you a handful of dive-up units, a used gate system and a Facebook marketplace listings as your entire marketing department. Margins here can be shockingly high because land and construction were both cheap. But so is your ceiling. You are capped by population density and there simply aren't enough renters within a 10-minute drive to ever make this scale past a side income. Most owners at this level run a business off a spreadsheet and a padlock, and that's genuinely enough, right up until a competitor builds 2 miles down the road. Tier 2 is mid-market and regional. Here you are looking at $800,000 to $4 million for a multi-building facility with a mix of drive-up and climate-controlled units, professional signage, and a real access control system. This is where independent operators either become regional consolidators or get quietly eaten by them. The difference between winning and losing at this tier almost never comes down to the real estate. It comes down to who understands the pricing algorithm better. A facility at this scale typically needs a part-time or remote manager, a call center for after-hours inquiries, and enough unit variety. Small, medium, vehicle, climate-controlled to capture every type of renter who drives past the sign. Tier 3 is institutional. Think $15 million and up for large urban or suburban facilities, often multi-story with elevators, climate zoning across the entire building, and enough units to justify a full-time revenue management team. At this level, you are not competing with the guy down the road anymore. You are competing with the publicly traded REITs that run software optimized to extract every possible dollar out of every square foot every single day. These operators aren't buying land and buildings so much as buying a cash-flowing algorithm with a roof over it, and their acquisition targets get chosen through demographic modeling, not gut feeling. Now here's the everyday metaphor that actually explains how this business prints money. Think of a self-storage facility like an airline seat. Expect the flight never leaves the gate. Airlines don't sell seats at one fixed price. They raise the price the moment demand ticks up, and they discount hard when a flight is underbooked. Because an empty seat that takes off is money gone forever. Storage units work identically. An empty unit sitting there for a month isn't a neutral event. It's a permanent, unrecoverable loss of revenue for that exact stretch of time, and it will never be recaptured. That's why the industry lives and dies by two numbers most renters have never heard of: occupancy rate and street rate versus in-place rate. Occupancy rate is simply what percentage of your units are currently rented. In-place rate is what your existing tenants are actually paying, which is usually well below the street rate, the price a brand new customer would pay walking in today. Operators use software to nudge existing tenants rent upward every few months, betting correctly that most people would rather absorb a small increase than deal with the hassle of moving their stuff again. Here is the counterintuitive fact that breaks normal business logic. The renters who complain the loudest about rent increases are also the ones least likely to ever leave. Storage tenants suffer from what the industry privately calls inertia-driven retention. Once your grandmother's china and your ex-furniture are logged behind a keypad, moving it becomes a bigger psychological project than paying an extra $15 a month. The facility isn't really selling storage. It's selling the avoidance of moving a day that will never actually happen. Walk the physical layout of a well-run facility and you will notice it wasn't designed by accident. Wide, perfectly straight drive lanes exist so a moving truck never has to reverse. Because friction at intake is friction against your first month's rent. Climate-controlled units get placed at the interior core of the building, forcing customers to walk past every other price tier on their way in, quietly anchoring them against the drive-up rate they just declined. Lighting stays bright and uniform around the clock, not for aesthetics, but because a facility that feels unsafe at 9 at night loses online bookings before a human ever sets foot on the property. Even the color of the roll-up doors is calculated. Bright, uniform paint isn't a branding flourish, it's a maintenance cost hedge. Because a facility that looks cared for photographs well online and rents faster than one that looks abandoned, even when the actual security is identical. Every dollar spent on paint and lighting is really a dollar spent shrinking the number of days a unit sits vacant. And vacant days are the only real enemy in the business. The invisible liability hiding underneath all of this is the lien process. When a tenant stops paying, you can't simply toss their belongings in a dumpster. Most states require a formal notice period, a public auction announcement, and a documented sale process before you can legally clear that unit and put it back on the market. Every delinquent tenant isn't just lost revenue. They are a legal timer running in the background, and until that timer expires, that unit sits dead, unsellable and unrentable, quietly dragging down your occupancy number at the entire time. Now, the two ways this business actually kills its owners. The first is a capital structure problem, and it's a real one. You Store It Trust, the self-storage REIT that later rebranded as CubeSmart, expanded aggressively through the mid-2000s and rode leverage all the way up to roughly 70% of its assets value by 2009. When credit markets seized during the financial crisis, that debt load nearly strangled the company. It survived only by issuing a painful, dilutive round of equity just to cover its coming debt maturities. And it spent years afterward rebuilding a balance sheet it never should have let get that thin in the first place. The second failure mode is market mismatch, and it hits smaller operators even harder. In the years leading into that same downturn, developers overbuilt storage facilities across dozens of suburban markets, chasing population growth projections that simply never materialized on schedule. Independent operators who financed construction on the assumption of rapid lease-up found themselves competing for same shrinking pool of renters against 3 or 4 facilities built within a mile of each other. Occupancy in those oversaturated corridors stayed depressed for years. Some sold at a loss to the very consolidators who had been circling the whole time. Others simply defaulted, handing the keys back to a lender who now owned a half-empty building in a market that couldn't absorb it. So here's the whole business collapsed into one sentence. Revenue equals occupied square footage times price per square foot minus the carrying cost of every unit sitting empty while your liens clock ticks on. The ones that aren't paying run well. This business throws off net margins in the 30 to 40% range, some of the highest in all of commercial real estate. Public Storage built an entire empire on exactly this math, becoming the largest owner of self-storage real estate on the planet, by treating every square foot like inventory that must never be allowed to sit idle. The system rewards exactly one kind of person, the operator obsessive enough to track occupancy and rate curbs weekly, willing to raise prices on tenants to inertia bound to ever leave. It punishes everyone else. The retiree who bought an facility thinking it would run itself just became an unpaid, unlicensed landlord for a bunch of boxes nobody is coming back for.